Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, this is True Crime and Beauty with Leah, and I'm Leah. If you're not new here, then thank you for joining me again. If you're not new here, you're also going to notice that I went a little haphazard with trimming my brows, and they look like I didn't have eyebrows before, but now I have just trimmed them so short that it's okay, so don't do that when you're really, really busy because you totally just, yep, no eyebrows. Anyways, today's going to be probably a long story. It is a non-stop kind of start to finish kind of thing, and I'm not going to give a lot of back history. It's just going to be like a summary because all their back histories are quite similar. And yes, I said all there. There are more than one serial killer in this video. So grab a snack, sit back and relax, and let me tell you a story. Today's story starts in Australia. This is probably one of the most well-known cases over in Australia, and especially in South Australia. This actually floored me when I was reading about this. I also watched the movie on it. These murders spanned between 1992 and 1999. There are 12 murders. One was not considered done by them because they didn't have enough proof. They couldn't be convicted of it. The murderers are Wagner, Bunting, Velasquez, and Hayden. Those are all their last names. I'll probably be going by their last names because this is crazy. It is not just a murder. These guys got together and murdered people. There were other people that came into play that helped out with other murders, and they ended up becoming victims to these people, especially Wagner and Bunting. And if you guys are not familiar with this by now, with me tossing out those names, this is the story of the bodies in the barrel. That is what this is labeled as, has been labeled as in Australia. And those of you who are over there probably know immediately as soon as I said that name. Let's go ahead and get started, get some brows on, and let's go. I'm going to go ahead and toss out a real quick warning. This is a true crime video. That means we can have things like murder, assault, sexual assault, rape, decapitation, cannibalism, any type of brutality that you can really think of. These are the things that are in true crime cases. If this is not something for you, I do have just regular makeup videos that are before these. Go ahead and click on one of those. Enjoy that. But if this is not for you, or if it has any types of triggers, go ahead and just clip off. Your mental health is more important than a video. So today we'll be using the ColourPop brow pencil, and this is in soft black. This case starts off in Australia, and the summary of their childhood, these people's childhoods, is basically it's a really rough childhood for all of them. And they end up finding solace in each other almost. They lived in rough neighborhoods, and though there were age gaps in the men that did this, they found a common bond because of what had happened to them or what they were trying to protect each other from. So the murderers' names, now I'm going to give you their names right now, and then I'll just go to the last names. So there's Mark Hayden, James, or aka Jamie Vlasikis, Robert Wagner, and John Bunting. And like I said in the beginning, that these men all came together as like this commonality of sexual assault. It was said that Bunting was allegedly sexually assaulted by a friend of his brother's when he was a young child, which left a mark on him, obviously. And as a youth, he started just really acting out, and he really liked killing things, like anything. It's like bugs or, animals, things like that. He just really enjoyed that hunt and kill type of situation. Mr. Wagner was no different in this. In fact, they bonded. They were the first two to really kind of bond together over everything that they had been through. And Wagner became more like, kind of like a backup guy for him. Anything that Bunting would say, Wagner would just go right along with it. He did not ask questions. He was just in it for the entire long haul. He went with this. He didn't stop and go, hey, why are you trying to kill this person, or why are you trying to... He was in it to win it. He was going for it. Well, some people say they had met like in church kind of way, networking. And they lived in this little rural area in Adelaide, South Australia. And that was also kind of a small area. But it's interesting because that's not the town that is most notoriously known for this. It's actually a place called Snowtown, and we'll get to that. And in Snowtown, actually only one of the murders happened in Snowtown. All the other ones happened elsewhere. But Snowtown is just a small little community of like 100 and something, or a couple hundred people. That is, their name is just forever changed for this. They're described as just like people who just go and retire and don't want to be bothered. Bunting was really good at recruiting people for his cause. He would just really try to find out about people. He actually had a gentleman that was an informant who was a known pedophile, and his name was Barry Lane, and he was a known pedophile. Like, you would think, like, why is he hanging out with this guy if he's got such an innate hatred for pedophiles and homosexuals? Because Barry was both. John Bunting was using him as an informant because he was a pedophile, and he could like get information about other pedophiles that were around and then tell Mr. Bunting about these pedophiles, and he'd be able to track them down a whole lot easier. So he kept Barry close. He kept him around just for that reason. That was the NYX brow glue. I use that very often. And we're going to use the Becca under eye primer today. So John was definitely the ringleader in this entire operation. And I would have to say it was like Operation Get Rid of All Pedophiles and Homosexuals, because that's who he targeted. He wanted to be the one that was going to get rid of these people from their area or even further. Bunting also thought that he had like this innate ability to pick out a pedophile or homosexual just by looking at him. Like, he thought like he had this sixth sense when it came to them, and he could be like, oh, that person's just like a pedophile, and that person's just this and that. He legitimately thought that he had the capability of picking out these people from afar. Now, some people, I'm sure you could, but not everybody. So this was genuinely what Bunting thought that he was here on this earth to do, is to rid the world of pedophiles and homosexuals. And he set out to do that. And at first he had, like I said, he had Wagner with him as his like ride or die dude. Now remember, they really truly felt that whatever John said was exactly what was going down. Like, that this was the Bible when it came to, okay, so Bunting said that person over there is a pedophile with no extra knowledge or any incidents or anything like that. Okay, well, him and Wagner were going to go off and kill him anyways. Didn't matter. or at least target him, maybe beat him up. Today we're using the Ordinary High Adherence Silicone Primer. For our primer, I just put it on. We're going to do a little bit of underpainting, which means we're going to put some things on first, and then we put the foundation on top of it. So we're going to use some She Glam liquid blush today. And this is in Rose Ritual. Very pretty color. Now, I also did watch the movie, the Snowtown Murders, and they were actually really good. It was a good movie, but it was also kind of hard to watch in some areas. I'm not going to lie. There were some places that I skipped over because it was legitimately pretty dang brutal, and there were some things on there, some nudity that I really did not want to see at all. Not like I really planned to go out and see nudity in movies, but this was nudity that I definitely did not want to see, and I was not expecting at all. I really was not. And so yeah, if you choose to watch that, there is some aggressive nudity that yeah, I was not expecting at all. So if you do seek out that movie, please heed the warning. Like, it addresses all the topics that are very uncomfortable. And also with the nudity, I just did not like the nudity part. Now, I know that it was addressing the certain things that were really important that needed to be addressed in the movie, but yeah. So just so you know, so you're forewarned about that. They depicted, like, the way they depicted John in the movie, I felt like John Bunting, that it was really well done, because there was a cold, calculated side of him that really came out well, especially in these murders. It's like, in the movie, it showed that Mr. Bunting did not even flinch when it came to murder. It was just one of those things. It was a means to an end. It's what needed to happen. And he had no qualms with taking this out and doing it. He also came across, the actor did a good job portraying the fact that there was this type of affection that John Bunting had for Jamie, who Jamie Vlasikas. I am totally screwing that name up, but I have a feeling I am very, very, very sorry. It's almost like he was the father that Vlasikas. I'm gonna have to call him Jamie, because I'm gonna keep messing up that name. That Jamie never had. So, see, Bunting met Jamie's mom, and they started having a relationship. Jamie really, really liked him. Like, he did not want to give up on this guy. This guy took time. John Bunting took time to get to know Jamie and really get to know all the kids. He kind of watched out for them. For instance, in the movie, it portrays a sexual predator living across the street from Jamie and his family. And this predator basically does some inappropriate things with the younger children, and, you know, does some inappropriate things with Jamie. And John shows up out of nowhere and basically is in the middle of the night just annoying this guy, and constantly, and then it just progressed from there to continue to annoy this guy until this guy left. And I can kind of see, and he felt like he was doing this service to save Jamie and his family while dating Jamie's mother, which I feel like that was really portrayed really well in the movie, about how Mr. Bunting just had this affection for the kids. For foundation today, we're going to use the IRL Filter Foundation by Revolution. It's F7. I have the concealer. I'm going to use that one as well, along with some Too Faced concealers. I like the concealer, so I figured I'd try the foundation. So, As he decides to start recruiting these people in, you know, Jamie is seeing some things that as a child you shouldn't, or he's kind of getting the gist of some things that a child shouldn't. And Jamie was young at the time. He was much younger than John. So they depicted that really well, I felt like, in the movie. So they kind of depicted about how everybody kind of came together and how all these different people became underneath John Bunting's kind of spell-like manipulation. And other than Robert Wagner and him, because they became, and not the actor, Robert Wagner this is a different one. And so they kind of just portrayed that really well. Well, he also had a habit of, if you became no longer useful, you were not serving a purpose for him, then he would either kill you or get rid of you, like I said before, or he would just cut you off. And that's actually what happened to Barry Lane. He actually ended up murdering him, and I will come across that when I start talking about the murders. But he did murder Barry. 1 minute Barry's there telling him all the information, and then next minute he's gone. He's just gone. So he just was constantly networking and making friends. Like, he made friends with Mark Hayden, and Mark Hayden had a wife named Elizabeth. All of a sudden, like, Elizabeth goes missing. This is what really prompted the police to start investigating and looking into this, because they were looking for Elizabeth Hayden. You know, she was a wife and a mother, and so they were looking for her. It was not like her to just up and go missing. And so this was kind of like the beginning of the end. Once she was missing, everything started. Okay? So there's a lot of information. I'm going to have to refer to my notes with all of this, and I will try to clip that part out when I refer to my notes, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of that. So there was like a Land Cruiser that they had been using to transport like bags and barrels to different areas. Okay? And then there was a bank that they had been renting. And I say a bank, it's like a bank that was no longer in use. And so they were renting it, and it had a huge vault inside of it, which most banks do. And they actually used that bank vault to store bodies. As they continued on in their investigations of looking for her, they got a phone call that was like, hey, we saw somebody loading a Land Cruiser at Elizabeth Hayden's house to, just the other day, or around the time she went missing, that this Land Cruiser was loaded up. And these gentlemen were there. They were loading it up, and it just seemed really weird that they were there. So they got that, and they go over, and nothing seems to be really like amiss about it, you know. Ray Davies was allegedly a pedophile, and he also lived in a mobile home, not a mobile home, like a trailer that you can drive, like an RV. That's the word I'm looking for, an RV. He lived in an RV in the back of Susan Allen's backyard. They believe that he had assaulted some of her grandchildren, but that really wasn't proven. And also Barry Lane was missing, of course, because he had run out of his usefulness for Mr. Bunting. And he did not believe in keeping pedophiles on this earth, so he removed him from this earth. To set my under eyes, I'm going to be using the e.l.f. Under Eye Setting Powder. Well, so now all these people were coming up missing, and it was just, people were starting to realize that, hey, these people had something to do with Bunting and Wagner. It's like they all had a commonality, was hunting Wagner, and not just that, but Mark Hayden as well was part of this little crew. And all of these people had those guys in common. Now, like, I'm not mentioning Jamie because he was really kept out of things other than watching and listening to certain things. He was really kept out of everything because he was young at the time, at the beginning of this. And once he became able, then they joined him into the murders, which he actually only ended up being involved in about the last 4 murders. And I'm using Wet n Wild Photo Focus setting powder to set down the rest of my face. So with all these people missing, the police started really looking around and trying to find out, okay, what they knew the commonality now were those 3 men, Wagner, Bunting, and Hayden. How could they prove that they did this? So they got this lead to go down to Snowtown where they the guys were really good at like changing tags and spray painting cars and stuff like that to kind of hide things. They actually were seen down in Snowtown, and the people were like, hey, yeah, we saw that guy. We saw him the other day. You know, he was out in this vehicle, and the vehicle matched the description of the one that they were looking for. Today for our eyes, we're going to be using the Tardius Pro palette. So they arrive at this house where they see this particular vehicle, and they're like, wait a minute, this matches perfectly to what we're looking for. So they go and they knock on the door like, knock, 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 hi, we're the police. And surprise, surprise, a gentleman comes to the door. It is not the ones he's expecting to see. And the guy's like, yeah, I know those guys. That fits the perfect description of these guys that left this vehicle here. And it was Wagner and Bunting and Hayden, which now linked this vehicle, which they call it a cruiser. I would have called it a van, but they called it a cruiser. They linked this vehicle to all 3 of those guys now. So now not only is the commonality of the missing people these 3 guys, but it's also this van has these 3 guys as the commonality as well. And the owner of the owner of this house where the vehicle was found said, hey, these guys are renting a bank down the way. Remember, Snowtown is very small, so it was very easy to say, hey, yeah, this person, that person, everybody knows everything that's going on. Sorta. So they were renting this bank, and naturally, what do the police officers do? They go to the bank. This gentleman had no idea just what he was leading those officers into, nor did the officers have any clue what they were going to be led to and what they would end up finding at this small Snowtown bank. They went to the bank and ended up going in and finding that this bank had been, like, the vault was open and it was covered in like a black plastic. The door was covered in a black plastic. It was like all taped all the way around, except for like a slit down the middle, which was also taped, but it was like more like taped for entrance and exit. So you tape it up if you left and tape it up if you entered. So it was like almost like a makeshift slit door, like those screens that open and snap back together kind of thing. So that's what these officers were entering into. They were not expecting to come in and enter anything that they were fixing to see. Nothing at all. No one could have prepared them for what they were going in to find. Once they were in the vault, they did find these barrels that the other gentleman had said, hey, there had also been some barrels that had been kept in here in this cruiser thing, but they're not there now. Where could they be? Maybe they're at that bank. It seems like this guy had a lot of information, but I did not go digging for his name because they did not talk about his name in the documentaries, any of them that I looked at, and any of the information. So I'm presuming that he wants to keep his identity under wraps. So let's respect that. Yeah, they they went into this bank vault and they were like calling up like the people, like, hey, the forensics, those people. They're like, hey, we have like this bank vault and it's sealed up. It was sealed up, and when we came in, there's a bunch of barrels. What should we do? They're trying to get advice because they don't want to disturb a crime scene. Well, they were like, well, open the barrels. Got to find out what's going on, so let's open the barrels. So when they walked in, after talking about what they found, saying that they found gloves and knives and weapons of sorts, they were, let's open the barrels. And what they found when they opened the barrels, the first thing they saw, one of them saw, was a foot sticking up. And naturally, when you open a black barrel, maybe they were preparing themselves. I hope they were preparing themselves for what they were going to find. But they found a foot. And then they continued to open up these barrels, and they found more body parts. And the one barrel with the foot had like something hunched over in it and some clothing. And they were like, they call them back up. Hey, this is what we found. Okay, got to bring them in, because this is now a crime scene. This entire bank is a crime scene, obviously. Not just a missing persons that they thought they were going to go across. No, this was a full-on murder investigation. By now, they had enough to arrest Wagner, Bunting, and Hayden. But unfortunately, these guys were not talking. They were not opening their mouths at all. They weren't saying a word, which is kind of a pain in the tush when you're an investigator and you're trying to solve a crime when the criminal won't talk. I mean, I could see why that would be a problem. Well, then they received a phone call. And this phone call gave them the area of another body. So they're over here trying to figure out how many bodies are in these barrels. And now they get another phone call. Now they get a phone call saying, hey, we know where another body is buried. You might want to go check out this backyard, little garden area situation and see what you can find. And I'm using the Tardiest eyeliner, double-sided eyeliner in black. And I'm using the liquid eyeliner side. So the police get to this abandoned house. And they go there with like a radar detector that could penetrate deep into the ground and kind of find masses. And it sure enough landed on a mass. And when they dug it up, hold on one second. When they dug it up, they realized that this was the remains of Suzanne Allen. And this area, this abandoned residence, was not done just yet. They continued and also found the remains of Ray Davies. Now, this was like, okay, these two people have been missing, and this one we definitely were looking for, and now we're like, uh-oh, we have this other body. That residence had something else in common than two dead bodies. It was the previous residence of John Bunting himself. So that means everything points to John Bunting now. Everything. From the receipts saying that he was renting the bank to this previous residence having dead bodies at it. There was dead bodies that were in these barrels at the bank, and they were still looking them up. Luckily, these bodies were preserved, almost mummified, by the water and acid ratio of the body's water, and the acid they were using was not enough to break down the bodies. So it became more of like a mummification type thing, and they could find tattoos and fingerprints and other things that could help them identify who these people were that were in the barrels. And now they had two other bodies that were buried in a place that John Bunting had to do with. Everything pointed towards him. He was the ringleader. He was the one who did all of this, or at least started all of this. This is the Lunch Money Super Shock highlighter from ColourPop. Super pretty. I've used this in other videos. So now that they're like, they already had him arrested and they were just piling up evidence for him. I'm really going to pack in this color here. So while they were looking through all of these bodies, they not just found out that they could like identify some of them with their just, you know, the fingerprints and even features of what they looked like. They could identify them, but they could also identify some of the ways of death. Some of them still had ropes around their necks. So they just were put in the barrel and had ropes still around their necks, and that's how they were murdered. And it's like they didn't even bother covering that part up. Maybe they thought that the acid would dissolve it, but obviously, you see the body has a lot of water in it, and it neutralized the acid in the barrels. It takes a lot of acid to decompose a body, because the water content in the body will obviously compensate and then neutralize the acid. Not only could they tell that they had with the ropes around the neck, but they also could see on some of them where they had been burned with cigarettes, and also had some charring in genital areas, showing burns of that. Like I said, this acid and water combination mummified them. It didn't really break them down like the murderers had expected. After they had been arrested, Jamie Vlasikis had basically he got arrested as well and began to talk about the things that had happened. See, he came into play later on, and because of his rough life, he had felt like John, like I said before, was a white knight or his rescuer, or like the father he never had, the person that he wanted to protect him. He was trying to protect him, but it was a give and take with Mr. Bunting. It was a give and take for sure. And they say that Jamie's conscience got the best of him, therefore he started talking. During several interviews with the police, it is said that it was like a 2,000-page statement made from James Vlasikis himself. He recounted horrifying details of each murder, and the ones that he knew about, and then the ones that John Bunting had confided in him, and then he began to talk about that. That's why I haven't thus brought up the murders yet, because we're fixing to find out what happened. To add a little sparkle to the lid, I am adding the Liquid Crystal Body Liner by NYX. With Jamie confessing to everything, it was just like, that was like the nail in the coffin, just sealing the deal of them knowing the timeline, the actual timeline of how things had transpired with these killings. And that's something that not every if they don't have a confession from the murderer, police can only guesstimate the timeline of things. And that's something that they actually had the ability to question Jamie about, and Jamie was more than happy to spill the beans with all of it. And in the movie, I will say that they did a good job depicting the turmoil in his conscience over all of this that was going on. And of course, we're going to go ahead and just curl my lashes. For mascara, we're doing Essence Volume Stylist. I love all of these mascaras. For blush today, we're going to use the Ellen Tracy palette. I actually love this kaleidoscope of blushes. It's truly one of my favorites. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and start going down the list of the murders and what happened to each person. Clinton Trezas was actually surprised by John Bunting and hit in the head with a hammer, and his skull was caved in. Ray Davies was around 26. He was killed between December 25th, 1995 and January of 1996. He was a suspected pedophile, and he also was one of the bodies that were found in the actual barrels. They believe that Ray Davies had assaulted some of Susan Allen's grandchildren. Remember, I had talked about that? And he was about 26 years old. They do believe that Bunting also killed her. Remember, we had talked about that, but they couldn't prove it. And this is the Physician Formula Butter Bronzer. Ray was also strangled by Wagner and Elizabeth Harvey, who was Jamie Vlasicka's mother. She did end up dying in 2001 because of cancer. So yeah, his mother was involved as well. So allegedly she was involved as well. And today we're going to also be using 2 of the NYX's Soft Matte Cream Lippies, and this was in Stockholm and this one is in Abu Dhabi, and I'm going to be kind of mixing and matching them so they can blend up real nice. Now there was also another gentleman by the name of Thomas Trevelyan, who they believe was linked to the murders as well. Remember, I had said that there was a bunch of them, like John Bunting would pull these people in, but kept Robert Wagner next to him, the closest, and would pull these other people in, and they would help him and feed him information, and then he would either drop them off if he didn't think they knew enough to be a trouble later on, or he would kill them. This is the one that he actually suffered from schizophrenia, and he actually was hung by a tree to make it look like a suicide. But they did figure out that it was not a suicide. This is the Curvy Lip Pencil by ColourPop. So people at first did not question his death because they thought that it was a suicide. And of course, my favorite Milani Make It Last setting spray. He also had the strange feeling like the Grim Reaper was actually going to kill him. He did have allegedly had a hand in killing Barry Lane. Barry Lane was 42. Some people believe that he was actually previously and allegedly in a relationship with Robert Wagner, though no one will really, Wagner would not confirm that. But allegedly, Wagner had said that Barry Lane had raped him, and also Trezas, the first victim that I had spoken about. Barry Lane was strangled inside his own house, and his toes were crushed with pliers during these torture episodes that Wagner and Bunting really enjoyed having. He was then rolled in a carpet and then disposed of in one of the barrels. He was also one of the bodies found in the barrel. Michael Gardner was 19 years old, and he was a cross-dressing homosexual, and that's why he was targeted by the group. He was actually obsessed with hygiene and cleanliness, as if that was a crime. Bunting and Wagner actually strangled him to death and forced him to stand until he eventually lost his life. This is the ColourPop Luxe Gloss, and it is in the shade Tricky. I'm just going to dab this on the center of my lips, give him a little something. Gavin Porter actually lived with the alleged killer Jamie in 1998. He is a friend of Jamie's, and he was a drug addict. They were on a program together to try to get clean, but he was just not doing really well with keeping clean. On the morning of his death, Porter was working on his car and was still kind of drugged from the night before, some shenanigans with some drugs that he had done. And Wagner and Bunting came into the back seat of the car where he had passed out to get some sleep, or the drug effects, I'm not really sure. But they did strangle him to death. They just kind of felt like he was a waste of air. That's these little tidbits that I'm throwing in are actually things that they felt, they said, or commented on. Choi Yud was 21 years old. While sleeping in his bed, he was hit by planks and jack handles by Bunting, Wagner, and James Vlasic. He was then dragged into the bathroom, cuffed and gagged. His toes were squeezed with pliers until they busted. Before he died, he was actually forced to apologize on allegedly sexually assaulting Jamie Velasquez, who was his stepbrother. To ensure that he was dead, Wagner actually stood on his chest to make sure. Frederick Brooks was 18. He disappeared around September of 1998. His mother, Jody Elliott, was engaged to Bunting and was the sister of Elizabeth Hayden. Talk about a little, do you get that? Bunting murdered Elizabeth Hayden and Mark Hayden and Bunting were both arrested for these killings. So it seemed like anybody that was around Bunting he was just pick and choosing whoever. It was a small town, so it's whoever he was around, he was deciding. He was like the judge, jury, and executioner. That's how John Bunting felt he was. He was beaten while cuffed. He was given electric shock to his body. He was also burned with cigarettes. And if I didn't say this before, his toes were crushed with pliers. I don't know why they did this. This was something that was definitely their trademark, because they did this to a lot of their people. Bunting did this because he thought Fred was a pedophile. And not just to have the beating and the with multiple different things, and the gagging and the burning with cigarettes and electrocution. He also had a lit sparkler, this is very graphic, put down the eye of his genitals, and the screams, I'm sure, were utterly horrific. But yeah, it was put down completely into his genitals. And then he was strangled to death. As if he couldn't succumb to his injuries, they strangled him to death. All because they suspected he was a pedophile. They didn't even know for sure if he was a pedophile, or he hadn't even assaulted anyone that they knew of, nor had he assaulted anyone that anybody. That it was just an assumption, and John Bunting decided that this was the course of action. All of these things was the course of actions that he would do to get rid of this man in a vigilante type of style. Throughout these murders, I do have more, believe it or not, but I wanted to tell you that at times they recorded the voices of the victims saying a kind of a script, so that they would be leaving voicemails to family members, don't call, I went overseas, or don't call, I met someone and went away, or even worse things were said. But Bunting made them say these scripts so that they would try to cover up their murders and their disappearances. Another murder was Gary O'Dwyer, and he was 29 years old, who was basically an invalid and had suffered a brain injury in a car accident. Bunting, Wagner, and Vlasic had been invited over for a few friendly drinks to this gentleman's house this disabled person's house. And they came on the pretense of enjoying some time with this gentleman as friends. But they attacked him, grabbed him, handcuffed and beat him, whipped him with a leather belt, and eventually he succumbed to it and was murdered by them. And the reason behind his murder was as simple as Bunting said he had not killed in a while. That's the reason they took on his life. Elizabeth Hayden was 37 years old. I had mentioned her before. Her mom, Jody, was engaged to Bunting, and she was also the wife of Mark Hayden. Not just that, but the gentleman that they murdered and used the sparkler on, Fred, was her nephew. Like I said, this is all like this small web that just unraveled. She was murdered because they believed she just knew too much and was a liability. And Bunting also felt like she annoyed him. So that's why she was murdered. She disappeared November 1998 and was said that she left and went to go be with a boyfriend. Yeah, I'm not... this. That's what the story was, that she left to go be with a boyfriend. And she was murdered because she annoyed him. David Johnson was actually the last one to be murdered. He was 24 years old and was lured to Snowtown and the bank under false pretenses of buying a computer. He was a smart young man who had his whole life ahead of him. And a lot of these people, they did rob their bank accounts. He was ambushed by the murderers. He was driven there with Esthetics, like Jamie Esthetics. He rode in the car with David Johnson to go to the bank in Snowtown. There, he was ambushed, like I said. He was handcuffed and beaten, strangled with his own belt. Then he was cut up into pieces and put into the barrels, along with the other bodies, the other 8 of the other bodies. And this was May 9th of 1999. After which they took part of his thigh, I believe it was, and took it across the street to a friend of theirs and said that they had some roux meat. And I couldn't figure out what that was until I really started looking into it, and that is another name for kangaroo. So kangaroo meat. So they were saying that it was kangaroo meat, and so the unknowing friend fried it up in a pan and then served it, and they ate it. The friend did not know what he was eating, nor did he know what they were cooking, but the others did, and they partook in this meal together. This trial took on a life of its own. It was all over Australia, not just South Australia. It was all over Australia in general. John Bunting felt like he was some type of vigilante, and he didn't really need to apologize for any of it. He figured he was doing the world a favor. There were over 70 witnesses there, over 2,000 witness statements, and over 5,000 exhibits of evidence against these people. 6 months into the trial, June 2001, Jamie's conscience got involved again. He pled guilty to 4 murders that he participated in. He was sentenced to 26 years. Then he flipped on his other people and became the star witness of the prosecution. Betcha they weren't expecting that one. With Jamie as their star witness, there was no denying what had happened, as he was part of this heinous group and these heinous crimes. Though he didn't participate in all of them, he was still there to witness it. And he could give them the how, what, when, and why of what was going on and the timeline that they so desperately needed. After years of legal arguments, even after all of that evidence, years of legal arguments, the trial of Bunting and Wagner began October 16th, 2002. Mark Hayden was charged with 2 counts of murder and several counts of assisting in murders, like assisted murder, assisting an offender. His trial was separate from the rest of theirs. During the trials, they said that Wagner and Bunting came across very cold and callous. They did not have any remorse for what they had done. There was financial records and evidence showing that they also stole the victims' monies. The audio cassette tapes that were recorded by Bunting to to the ones that I said that had left the for like a voicemail kind of thing to tell people like, hey, I'm not coming back in town. The audio tapes have never, ever been released. To stop and think that all these people, all of the families that had lost these victims, all they had was this lingering heartache and emptiness of where that family member would have been in their heart. And also that the killers had forcefully made these people make audio recordings of some fake excuse as to why they were not going to be around and why they didn't want to be contacted. Some of them were harsher than others, some of them were nicer than others, but still it doesn't leave the fact that they were made to make these tapes, and how chilling it must have been to know that your family member was made to make this tape and they were dying as they were making these tapes. I don't care, like, if someone made me make a tape, my family is going to be out there looking. They're not going to be like, okay, Leah made a tape, she's all good, she's like, leave me alone. If I'm missing, my family is going to go out and be looking for me. They all coming for whoever's got me. Every single one of them, they're coming out. They're coming out in strength and force and then some. And in my like extended families and church families and friends of families and friends and all. Everybody's coming out for whoever has me. It's like, it's not worth it. Don't take me, because it's gonna rain hellfire down on you if you got me, you know? And I'm sure that these people because they preyed on people that wouldn't be missed, or so they felt, like these people would not be missed. Well, who are you to decide who's going to be missed and who's not? Just like, who are you to be the judge, jury, and executioner of people that, of these people? Why don't you report them and let the state take care of them or handle them? I get it. I understand. Trust me, I understand the need to take care of people like pedophiles that are in this world. I understand that more than you will ever know. But their butts are in jail now. So I digress. Let me tell you what happened to them. You know that Jamie got about 26 years, and then he's going to be out because he was actually convicted of the 4 murders out of the 12. And he was also the star witness, so that offered him some security and some leeway because he was remorseful and all of that. Wagner and Bunting were said to have no remorse whatsoever at the trial. They felt like they were cold and calculated, calloused even. Even when the details of the murders and tortures were going through, they had no reaction. Like, it didn't even faze them that they went through, that they had done this to people. And At the end of the trial, they did believe that Bunting and Wagner killed for pleasure, not because they were trying to seek out their vigilante plan. They were convicted on all counts of murder except for the one of Suzanne Allen, in which they said that she died of natural causes, and the jury and judge did not have the evidence saying otherwise, so that left a hung jury. The most they said was they buried her. The judge also said that Wagner and Bunting could not be rehabilitated, so he sentenced them to life without parole. Though Bunting is trying to get a non-parole date where he would be able to serve out this special time and then start being able to apply for parole, it's just not working out for him. The judge said it right. These people cannot be rehabilitated. Mark Hayden was convicted of assisting in the murders, and he got 28 years. Believe it or not, the Snowtown Bank in Snowtown, Australia, still stands to this day, and was actually featured in the movie itself. When I was watching this, I was in shock. I am like stumbling over my words because I do not even know how these people who were reenacting the movie could even go in there and be surrounded by the environment of which these people died and their bodies were stored there. I don't know why it's even still there. Honestly, I really don't. And so this is the story of the body in the barrel murders, also known as the Snowtown murders, in South Australia, in a small town called Snowtown. This gruesome tale is what changed how people look at Snowtown. This quiet, couple hundred people town that didn't want to bother anybody. Their legacy and story is forever changed because of these 4 people. As always, I ask you to respect the privacy of those involved in this case. Thank you so much for watching my video. I appreciate every single one of you. This one was definitely a doozy. It was definitely a doozy. I had to stop watching the documentaries at some times. I had to pause the movie numerous times. I had to skip forward in the movie a couple of times. It was a lot. And I thank you guys who made it through this video with me. As always, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate every single one of you guys. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Also, leave a comment if you want to. I like reading them and I will respond to them. You can also leave comments in my Instagram. I will link that below per usual. Thank you guys so much again, and take care of yourselves and have an awesome day. See you next time.